Welcome to another installment of the AMSOIL Information Series. I'm Rob Stenberg, and we've got a special story to tell you today. With me, Mr. Len Groom, Technical Product Manager for Power Sports at AMSOIL. Len, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Rob.
And I know we've got a great story. What do we got in front of us here?
Well, what we have is a torque converter and some clutches out of Scott Douglas's race truck.
And Scott Douglas is AMSOIL's sponsored off-road racer.
Yes, he runs the Pro 4 truck in the off-road series.
So what does a torque converter do?
Well, the torque converter is basically a fluid coupling between the engine and the transmission. It takes the place of, let's say, a clutch. It allows you to stop at a stop sign without having to push on another pedal. It does the same thing in a racing application. And
I've heard that they set these a little bit differently, though, for racing. How would it differ from a racing application versus your passenger car?
In a racing application, and we know that these guys are always chasing speed. They always want to get in the corner better. They want to get out of the corner better.
Sure.
Speed is the key, and they're always going to push the limits.
Sure.
So what happened here, they designed this converter to have a larger than normal amount of slip. And that means that the engine and transmission wouldn't be at the same speed. The converter is what's called slipping. And anytime the converter or any part slips, heat is going to be the result.
So you wouldn't normally do that in a passenger car, but for racing, it has its advantages.
Sure, there's always going to be a trade-off. The more slip, the more heat. But if it's fast, it might be worth it.
Okay, so what happened with this particular converter?
So Scott knew that this was a loose setup, and he knew that it was going to build heat, but the truck was extremely fast, so they ran it anyway. And they were quick. And what happened, partway through the race at the mandatory caution, he called in and had a conversation with his crew chief. The transmission temperature gauge was pegged. It was laying on the pin at over 350 degrees.
So it's hot.
It was extremely hot. So it was decision time. They needed to decide what to do, bring it in, let it cool off, or go for it. So the decision was, let's go for it. Let's try and win this race, knowing that everything was extremely hot. So what happened is they continued to run. The transmission was shifting normal. Everything was working just fine. But what actually happened was a mechanical coupling on the transmission cooler line failed. That means the rubber line goes into a metal fitting. That actually, the line got so hot that it slipped out of the fitting and sprayed transmission fluid all over the exhaust, and then a fire resulted.
So after that fire, how does a fire and how does that much heat affect one of these pieces of equipment?
Well, normally the fluid would have broken down before the mechanical coupling failed. You would have lost the transmission first. That's what you would normally see. But the fluid continued to perform under those extreme heat conditions. It was so hot, in fact, Rob, that this converter, when it went into the truck, when it was brand new, was bright red.
That's some heat.
It's a lot of heat.
And I'm not a transmission expert, but this equipment looks pretty clean to me.
Scott actually had this stuff all analyzed. He had the converter opened up, as you can see here. He had the transmission builder open up the transmission internals. And what they found was that these clutches looked so good. Now, normally if the fluid would have failed, you would see black buildup. You would see all kinds of charred remains of clutches, and this clutch would have failed. You would see bluing on these discs.
None. And there's
you
none
would see
there?
all kinds of scraping. None of that is on there. This converter looks great internally. In fact, the converter builder said he could weld this back together, put it back in the truck. Same thing with the transmission builder. These clutches and this converter could go back in.
Well, what about the fluid that was taken out of here?
It's interesting that you asked that because Scott got us a sample. So we ran it through the lab, and it is ready for continued service. The viscosity held, the additives look good. The fluid could have gone back in the transmission after that extreme heat situation.
That's a testament to performance of AMSOIL, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
Len, hey, thanks for telling us this story. It's a great one.
Okay, thanks, Rob.
For another installment of the AMSOIL Information Series, I'm Rob Stenberg. We'll see you next time.